He was born Richard Hetherington O'Kane in Dover, New Hampshire on February 2, 1911, as the youngest of 4 children. O'Kane attended high school at the highly prestigious Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, one of the oldest secondary schools in the United States. No less than 5 Nobel laureates, as well as heads of state and numerous congressmen, have attended Phillips Academy. After graduation in 1930, O'Kane attended the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, another bastion of American establishment power and prestige. He would graduate and earn his commission as an ensign on May 31, 1934. He first served aboard the light cruiser USS Chester as a deck and gunnery officer for a year, followed by a 2.5-year stint on another destroyer, the USS Pruitt. O'Kane's destiny as a submariner began when he undertook training at the submarine school in New London, Connecticut in 1938, after which he served on the submarine USS Argonaut for nearly 4 years until March 1942. That means O'Kane was serving on that submarine when the United States declared war on Japan after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. It was when O'Kane joined the USS Wahoo that his ascent as a submarine ace would really commence. Lieutenant O'Kane would serve as executive officer on the USS Wahoo under the captaincy of Lieutenant Commander Dudley W. Morton. O'Kane would quickly establish himself as an excellent officer and an especially promising tactician. He started service on that submarine, itself a famous American submarine, on May 15, 1942, lasting until July 1943. He left just a few months before the USS Wahoo was hit by Japanese depth charges on October 11, 1943, in the La Perouse Strait near the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido. Everyone on board USS Wahoo lost their lives. O'Kane was awarded the Silver Star Medal with 2 gold stars in lieu of a 2nd and 3rd Silver Star Medal and a letter of commendation due to his impeccable service on board the Wahoo. He was also given authorization to wear the commendation ribbon by the Secretary of the Navy. Lieutenant Commander O'Kane became prospective commanding officer of another submarine, the Balao-class USS Tang, in July 1943. O'Kane's fame as a submarine commander would be entirely intertwined with that of USS Tang. One cannot admire what the USS Tang achieved without admiring in equal measure what Richard O'Kane achieved as its commander. Tang commenced her short but illustrious career when she left Pearl Harbor on January 22, 1944. The Marianas Island chain in the western Pacific would be the scene of her first patrol, and by the time she arrived at Midway Island a few weeks later, she had sunk 5 Japanese ships and used up 16 of her 24 torpedoes. Her second patrol saw no sinking of enemy ships, but her third patrol was another stonker. After all, that patrol was considered one of the most devastating American submarine deployments against Japanese ships in all of World War II. In just one day, on June 24, 1944, Tang sank 3 Japanese vessels, and by the end of the patrol she had sank 39,160 tons of enemy shipping. That tally included the transport ship, the Nikken Maru, which was torn in half by a single torpedo from Tang, and in which 3,200 Japanese soldiers in transit lost their lives. Commander O'Kane's 4th patrol at the helm of Tang was another remarkable success. This time the patrol took the submarine into the waters just off the coast of Honshu in Japan. During this highly successful patrol, O'Kane and his men sent 6 Japanese ships to their watery graves. That included the 8,135-ton transport ship Tsukushi Maru. A notable and newsworthy feat of the USS Tang occurred during its 2nd patrol. Although she may have had no hits during that patrol, the crew of Tang did rescue 22 American seamen who had been downed near the Truk Atoll, in what is today the Federated States of Micronesia. O'Kane had ordered that the submarine take what was called lifeguard duty, which entailed stationing his sub near where the Americans were engaging the enemy in an air attack, so that any downed pilots could be rescued if needed. This obviously put his own submarine at greater danger of aerial and surface attacks, but O'Kane insisted his crew do it. Thanks to those actions, 22 airmen were saved from near-certain death by being hoisted onto the Tang. As commander, O'Kane took personal charge of the rescued airmen, ensuring that they got back home safely. It was more than 3,000 miles to reach base at Pearl Harbor. O'Kane ordered that everyone on board only have half rations in order to accommodate the additional men on board. One can only imagine what conditions must have been like during those days of journey back to Hawaii. The entire crew of Tang earned a Presidential Unit Citation thanks to what O'Kane did to ensure the rescue of those airmen. However, things came to a tragic end for Tang and the majority of its crew during the submarine's fifth and final patrol. The USS Tang, with O'Kane once again at the helm, left Pearl Harbor for its fifth patrol on September 24, 1944. Its destination was what was then called the Formosa Strait, today the Strait of Taiwan. It was a patrol mission and would be especially hazardous given where the submarine was to patrol. The Strait of Taiwan is very shallow, making it particularly treacherous waters for submarines. Speaking of submarines, want to learn more about them? Well, we have an exclusive community just for that. Simply click the first link in the description or in the pinned comment to join. Thanks, and now let's get back to the story. Tang began well with the sinking of two freighters, the Yoshugo and Gitamaru, during the night of October 10th to 11th, 1944. October 23rd saw even greater success after the American submarine encountered a large Japanese convoy. O'Kane made sure that the assault on the convoy was in the form of his specialty, a night surface attack. O'Kane ordered a bombardment of torpedoes that smashed into 3 different ships in the convoy, causing all of them to catch fire or start sinking. He then made sure that Tang dodged a tanker that was aiming to ram the submarine. Taking extreme evasive action meant that the American submarine forced the Japanese tanker to swerve away, causing it to crash into another Japanese tanker. Once freed of immediate danger, the Tang fired 4 more torpedoes from its stern. O'Kane was able to scurry his sub back into deeper waters in order to evade one of the Japanese escort destroyers that was coming for it. The very next night, October 24th, saw Tang lurking upon yet another Japanese convoy. However, it would be the last time that the American sub would ever see action. During the assault, O'Kane once again acted as he always did, super aggressively and firing multiple torpedoes at multiple vessels in quick succession. This time, it was 6 torpedoes fired at 3 ships in the convoy. More torpedoes were then fired from her stern at another freighter and tanker, with the tanker immediately being torn in two and blowing up. The huge explosion from the hit Japanese tanker impacted a nearby Japanese destroyer. Almost immediately, that destroyer started to sink, even as the blown-up tanker remained afloat, albeit completely ablaze. O'Kane decided to then concentrate once more the stricken tanker. Just 2 of Tang's 24 torpedoes remained, and O'Kane ordered that both be fired at the tanker. That's when everything went horribly awry. The last torpedo, an electric Mark 8, breached the surface and made a sudden hard left, circling right back at the American submarine from which it was fired. O'Kane, knowing it was a perilous situation, called for full flank-ahead speed. However, it wasn't enough, and the rogue torpedo slammed near the submarine's stern. A huge explosion followed, instantly killing the majority of Tang's crew and flooding 3 of its compartments. The submarine began to sink. 9 officers and men on the bridge, including O'Kane, were able to escape quite quickly. Unfortunately for the few other surviving men in the hull, they were violently crushed to death from extreme external pressure when one of the submarine's doors failed. Commander O'Kane and the other survivors were eventually hauled up into a Japanese ship. They were taken to Japanese POW camps, where conditions were brutal and the American crewmen, O'Kane included, were often tortured and treated even worse than the other camp inmates. O'Kane would be a POW for the remaining months of the war. Even though the USS Tang was destroyed on its 5th patrol, it had still managed to sink 7 ships, totaling 21,772 tons. The lost submarine would be awarded its 2nd Presidential Unit Citation for that 5th patrol, with O'Kane receiving the Medal of Honor in Washington, D.C. from President Harry Truman himself. The Naval Supreme Command cited his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity during the final operations of the USS Tang against Japanese vessels. In the end, O'Kane was initially given credit for the sinking of 24 Japanese ships, making him the most prolific American submarine commander in the Pacific theater of war. O'Kane always disputed that number, claiming his submarine had hit and sunk 33 ships instead. The official tally would indeed be later amended to the even more impressive tally of 33 ships totaling 116,454 long tons sunk by Commander Richard O'Kane. It was the highest number of ships and total tonnage by any single American commanding officer in the Pacific. He had been right all along about how many vessels he and his crew sank. Richard O'Kane would continue his esteemed military career following the conclusion of the Second World War. He would testify at Japanese war crimes trials, as well as serve in the Pacific Reserve Fleet as, among other posts, commander of Submarine Division 32. O'Kane then attended the Armed Forces Staff College in 1950-51, thereafter being assigned as chief instructor at the Submarine School at New London, Connecticut, followed by officer in charge from 1952 to 53. Command of the USS Sperry followed, after which he served as commander of Submarine Squadron 7. He returned to being an instructor in June 1955, this time at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and a year later was assigned to the Bureau of Ships, or more precisely, the Ship Characteristics Board, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations at the Navy Department in Washington, D.C. That would be his final active duty post before retiring as a newly decorated Rear Admiral in July of 1957. The mark of the man was affirmed by those who served under him. A 1999 article in the Honolulu Advertiser newspaper featured William Liebold, who had served as a boatswain's mate aboard the Tang, and who had this to say about his commander. O'Kane was probably one of the finest skippers I served under. O'Kane was a good leader. He was stern but fair, and I think everyone on board had complete faith in his ability. Rather sadly, Richard O'Kane would later develop Alzheimer's disease, eventually dying in a nursing home in Petaluma, California on February 16, 1994. He was buried with honors at Arlington National Cemetery, befitting of a man of his accomplishments. On October 23, 1999, the guided missile destroyer USS O'Kane was commissioned and so named in honor and memory of the man that was the greatest American submarine commander of World War II. The ship's motto is, "A Tradition of Honor,"